So thank you for coming today for this discussion on DEI, driving DEI with data. My name's Nadine Bent Russell. I am just introducing this amazing panel of people. I just wanted to say something that is just a principle here at with us at Honeywell. Is Honeywell is a data-driven organization, and over time we continue to elevate how we measure our DEI outcomes. So hopefully there'll be a lot of insights from this panel here, and I'm going to turn it over to Jason Sankey, your moderator for the day. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Jason Sankey. I am the CIO of the great city of Atlanta, right here. I am pleased to be joined by our panelists today, and I'm sure we'll have a robust discussion as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and most importantly, the use of data. It's interesting because, well, let's just say this. At the end, we'll leave time for questions, but if you want to engage, it's the last session of the day, so feel free to raise your hand. Let's have this lively conversation today. But it's interesting because DE&I has grown tremendously, really, over the past 3 years. I remember in 2020 seeing some commercials by some of our Fortune 500 companies, and I thought to myself, wow, you know, they're really investing in this concept. And so I did a little research before this session and just grabbed some data points I want to share before we start. So by 2065, there will no longer be a single ethnic or racial majority in the United States. Generation Z is the most racially diverse U.S. generation at 48%. Applicants with distinctively black names are less likely to move forward to the interview process. In 2021, the median earnings of full-time working women equaled 76% of their male counterparts. Diverse management boosts revenue by an average of 19%. Gender diverse teams are 15% more likely to outperform industry returns. 80% of workers want inclusive companies. And lastly, 40% of organizations have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a C-level priority. Does any of that resonate with anyone? I see some nods. So let's get started. First, let's start with Noelle London, CEO and founder of Illoominus. Tell us about your company and some of the innovative solutions that you guys are doing, particularly when it comes to utilizing data to determine outcomes in this space.
Happy to. Jason, that was a really good introduction, and talk about future-proofing your organization through DEI. I think that that's what really wakes me up, is how do we help organizations future-proof themselves with all those changes that you were talking about in the future. But hi, everyone. My name's Noelle London. I'm the founder and CEO of Illoominus, like Illuminate Us. What we do is we help organizations to activate and manage progress towards their diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI goals and commitments. We do that by bringing together all of their inclusion-related data, no matter where it lives, so that we track DEI across the entire employee journey and can tell you where to invest your efforts and which path is going to get to your goals around DEI the fastest. So our goal and our big vision is that we want to be the single source of truth for DEI data across organizations, so that for the very first time, we actually have a data set that tells us what works, and then we will share those insights and recommendations. So thanks.
So the single source of truth, that's an interesting concept. So let's go to Keith. Keith Scott, CEO of KL Scott & Associates. So tell us about your company and what do you do with that data or that truth that comes from a company like Illoominus?
So we are a social equity advisory and management consulting company. So we work primarily with local, state, and federal government agencies. We help leaders in government identify inequities in public policy and then build strategy on how to eradicate that. And that could be anything from workforce culture, environmental equity, justice, health equity, and so forth. But We utilize a lot of teaming partners that have data mining tools, such as yours, to help really source unstructured data, structured data, and put it into some data sets so that we can do analysis on it, find out correlations, trends, and so forth, and then work with local leaders or department leaders in the federal government, state, and so forth on building a strategy on what our findings are. And we've worked from everywhere from Alachua County all the way to Boise, Idaho, upwards to Massachusetts. And there's and I don't know if I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, but the United States has multi-cultures wherever you are in the country. So Boise, Idaho is totally different than, let's say, Atlanta, right? So you have to really start from a place of common understanding, common nomenclature, and once you've established that, then you can move your initiative forward. But working with a company such as yours, finding data is the most important thing to move the needle forward.
So I've never been to Boise, Idaho, but I would think that Atlanta is a little different.
Absolutely.
So that takes us to Sam. Sam Yehya, the partner and COO of Six Consulting. You bring an interesting perspective. Your company is a consulting firm. It's an IT consulting firm, right? So what are you seeing in the industry from a consultant or private sector, small business perspective in this space?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate we're talking about data, and you set up with the data set. I like that. You came prepared. Thank you all. Very nice to meet you. Pleasure to talk today about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll tell you a little bit about Six's journey. We do technology consulting, Salesforce, Microsoft, that kind of thing. And it wasn't just, seems like yesterday, but I think it was earlier in the year, we were doing the TAG Summit, and we were talking about data-driven companies, right? And what's interesting about this is now we're talking about specific uses of that same use case. So that's really important. And more often than not, as a technologist and an expert, when we're asked to speak about this, you're 100% right. What do we do with it? And you have great companies like Noelle's that have helped us get there, but it should be at the heart of everything you do. So before I answer your question fully, I kind of want to just see who here either works for or owns a diverse organization that's certified. Just one. You see there's not even that many people in the room. So Six is a diverse certified organization. The Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council right here in Atlanta won Council of the Year this year. And Six is actually the regional diverse supplier of the year. And we were just in New Orleans talking a little bit about these same things. So we think it's very important for organizations, large and small, to adopt diversity programs, right? So if you're a small organization or you're part of a small organization, you should be taking advantage of the fact that large organizations are doing that, even if you're not diverse. You can talk about hiring of different minority groups. And if you're a large organization, medium size, like Noelle goes after, or large, you should be talking about this with your executive leadership because it produces something special, right? There's a reason that companies do this. This isn't charity. And it actually has really profound impacts across the organization.
And that goes back to that statistic. I believe it was 40% C-level, C-suite is talking about and putting the plans together for DE&I within the organizations. But I want to go back, Keith. You mentioned something about nomenclature. And there's a lot of different opinions when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. How does one organization go about defining what those terms actually mean and implementing it within their organization?
Well, I'll say we start with, and one of my partners in the back row here, we start with establishing a glossary because, and this was actually a project that you led, they confused critical race theory with DE&I strategic planning. They have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And that is, again, based on where they were in the country, it's a cultural difference. So we start with a common set of terms, and we work with the organization to say, this is what diversity means, this is what equality means, this is what equity means, the difference between the two, the difference between inclusion and belonging, so that we start from a place where we have the same understanding. And only until you can speak the same language is when you can really have a conversation that's, both transmitted and received. And that's how we start our engagements.
Yeah. I think one thing is, because this panel is about data, and I think that that's a really interesting observation that we have as we talk to companies, is that I don't think that there's really a definition around DEI data. It's fascinating of sometimes we'll go to companies and they'll be like, hey, I'm not ready to look at data yet. Like, we're not mature enough to look at data yet. And then there's other companies that say, oh, we've got it all figured out. We don't need to look at any more data. And I think that understanding that data does not mean the same thing for every organization, it means different things. And there's a level of, it's kind of, we called it in the innovation sphere, or like data maturity, it's like an S curve, right? If there's different places that you are in that journey. And so when we talk about data, it's really important to define what we mean by data, because some organizations are starting this journey. And it's not that you don't need to look at data yet. You need to look at data from the very beginning to just have an understanding of what's happening within your organization before you start making these investments, because you need to know, hey, these are really the areas that we need to focus in. And then you go one step further, and you may be at a data maturity level where you're starting to your point, provide context around that data of, okay, we figured out this is the dashboard, this is what our data looks like. Now we want to start looking at what does that data mean, because data on a dashboard means nothing. If you've ever looked at a Tableau tool with an executive and they say, what am I looking at? That is like the worst feeling ever. It sounds like some of you resonate with that. So I would say that the context around the data is like step 2 of this is where we are, of we want to understand what is, if we're opening an office in Boise, Idaho, the goals in our DEI strategy should be different than it is in Atlanta, Georgia, because those are different communities and they have nuances between them. And then I think third of like those companies that say we don't need data because we've figured it all out, your dashboard, there's so much more we can be doing with that data that allows us to be strategic and allows us to start putting this as a workforce planning issue, where you can start to say, based on where we've been, step 1, dashboard, step 2, context around that data and what it actually means, step 3, where are we trying to go to future-proof our organization so that as we change demographics across the country, like, we are ready to have a workforce that is representative of those changing demographics. And so I think just, we talk a lot about definitions of DEI, B, J, whatever letter, and I'm not dismissing, it's important because there's different flavors of this in every organization. But I think that the data also doesn't have one definition.
You're spot on. And I was thinking about a client that we worked with about 2 years ago. They had a different HR system. They had 3 different HR systems for about 15 departments. So maybe 1 per 5 departments. And the public safety department had their own HR system. So when you're talking about promotions and compensation levels and things like that, there's a lot of bad decisions made from the disparate systems, and there's no single source of truth. So that's absolutely what you're talking about.
So my family and I were on this new journey. My daughter, she's in the 4th grade, and she developed an allergy. She's allergic to gluten, and she's allergic to dairy. And she loves bread, and she loves cheese. So I'm trying to figure out how to be creative. And when I think about data and how do we measure diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity and equity seem like easier data points. How do you measure inclusion?
I can start on that one. So how you measure inclusion, so I just have a story that I want to tell about that, if that's okay, of like why I think, to your point, Keith, like bringing this all together is so important, because when you're just looking at HR data, that might give you those diversity metrics. It may give you some equity, but it's not going to give you inclusion. And what we've seen within organizations, to your point, of There's a lot of different systems. On average, companies have over a dozen different HR systems, and they're not talking to each other. And so when we even bring those three letters together to say DEI, the problem is that most of the time organizations are looking at inclusion separately than they're looking at the D and the I, and so it's not telling the whole story. And I'll say, like, the way that most companies are measuring inclusion is by looking at things like employee engagement surveys and survey results. Great and very well-intentioned, but when that data is not being brought together with the D and the E, you're not getting the full story. And I'll tell you, we've seen this, where there was an organization that had a very well-intentioned leader. That well-intentioned leader in 2020 said, hey, I want my department within this organization, this is a core value of ours, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that. So they started measuring inclusion, and they started doing that by survey results. And so the leader thought, I'm doing good because look, inclusion is going up within my organization. What we actually found by bringing multiple of those data sets together is that inclusion was going up, but it's because representation was going down. And to put a finer point on that, it's because they were hiring white men into leadership over and over again and not noticing it because they weren't looking at this data in an ongoing fashion. And so when they were measuring inclusion, it was not telling the whole story because they weren't seeing why their inclusion scores were going up.
That's a great point. Sam, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Noelle has to say, and you can see that across organizations, right? I think that reminds me of, I think it was Indeed, and they came up, there was another session on AI, and they programmed this AI, you might have seen the article a few months back, to hire people instead of hiring managers, and it started hiring white males. Because the way they trained the data set, bad data, said, oh, and it showed them they had a propensity to hire white males, right? So when they made the AI, they trained it with the data that they had. And it depends on the size of your organization. Definitely mid-market and enterprise, you can't have one of those without the other, right? So the inclusion part is almost dependent upon the other two, and I think that's what Noelle was saying, right? You're not going to get good inclusion if you don't have something that's equitable, if you don't have a diverse group, or if you have something that's not diverse but it is equitable, your inclusion will look good when it's false, right? Because you're not diverse. So it's funny how 2022 we're still talking about the same things, but you can put these things together with professionals that focus on it, or with our firm as a diverse group, as a diverse firm. We work with Fortune 500 companies, right? Accenture, WestRock here in Atlanta, and we're given opportunities and knock them out of the park, and we're a diverse firm. We don't go to market like that. You don't need to go to market, but what's really important is to tell your story, right? And if you're not a diverse company, that's fine, but how do you support diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And one thing that we're asked to do across the United States is get clean data, clean it up, and help make it actionable, right? Descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. So the way to start that, if you can afford Noelle software and that's where you're going, 100% go do that. Why reinvent the wheel? Get somebody that does it for you. But if not, you can start, and I hate to say this, don't quote me on this, you can start with an Excel sheet, right? I hate, people are like, oh, my firm's not big enough, we're only 50 people. I see everybody's wincing, they're like, oh, Excel, oh gosh, he didn't say it. Believe me, it hurts me. You'll be hiring us next, so it's great. But start somewhere, right? She's like, don't do it, it's really bad. Start somewhere, right? We're experts in Salesforce, right? That's a very pervasive customer experience management tool now. You can ask your team to build a few fields, right? Who are our vendors? Who are our employees in HR systems or wherever you manage that? Who are we doing business with, right? And that'll give you a better way. And this is what seems like I preach to different crowds across the US, is you've got to start somewhere, right? So that's how you build inclusion, as Noelle said, with the first part of those two.
I want to add to that. So we also do cultural assessments where, it's qualitative data is underestimated, right? Because when you're speaking with people, we're interviewing people one-on-one, and it's a comfortable space, they really reveal their personal feelings on the culture that they're trying to work in. I mean, and we have anonymous assessments so that people can be their authentic selves when they're discussing this. So we couple qualitative data with quantitative data where we're doing what we call blind spot analysis, where managers may have this perception of the culture, but staff has a different perception. And without that analysis, that's the blind spot, right? So you may think you're leading and leading well, that your team is you know, feeling like they belong and they're contributing, and that's not the case. And without that blind spot analysis, you're not going to, as a leader, you're not going to get that insight. You have to have that. But I think from our engagements, the most rich information that we collect is through the stakeholder interviews and the focus groups, because we really get authentic feelings. We've had people identify as white, but they were really Hispanic, but they did not reveal that except for in the interview because they felt that they would be treated differently. LGBTQ. One of our clients actually sued the municipality that we were working with. So, and without having this qualitative portion of the work, you're not going to really get the insights there.
And to your point, I think I'll add a couple of things. You know, I want to make sure we talk about the different types of organizations out there, right? But who wouldn't love to do business in the Fortune 500 space or, you know, the Dow 1000, right? If you're a diverse firm, you should be measuring this because you can go in with that information. It really helps you open some doors. If you're not a diverse firm, showing your support for that, and when you get those doors open, or your salespeople, or the VPs, or executives, or whoever goes to those rooms, if you say, hey, we're not diverse, but this is how we support it, and this is what's important to us. And I'll tell you, an example is we're in Accenture's Diverse Supplier Development Program, right? It's very stratified air of some really amazing people, especially the Accenture crew, who are just world-renowned diversity professionals. And when we met this, she's amazing, her name's Nidra Dixon, who's the head of that program, you know, I sat down with her for lunch, which is great to get that thing. She said, it wasn't just about, I had the numbers lined up, right? But it was what you just said. It was the really, how were we qualifying it? And I told her a story about two different people. One, we hired somebody that was in this, you know, in the LGBTQ plus space, and they couldn't get a job. And she was more interested in that and then all of our diversity numbers. And then the second thing was we hired somebody that was a felon, and it happened years ago, and it was for marijuana possession. It's a convicted felon, but like something right now where you wouldn't even get a ticket, right? This was 15 years ago, and he said, I can't get a job. And now that person is a top engineer at a firm in this country. So sometimes having, obviously the data is important, but having the qualitative side of it and talking about that, even if you're not a diverse supplier, being an advocate for it and understanding it, it's not only good for business, but it's good for the community as a whole.
This topic isn't new, right? But it is gaining momentum. So how many people have been in a DEI training in the last 2 years? Think about your career 10 years ago. How many people were in a DEI training 10 years ago? A lot of hands went down. So as we start to develop this more and more, you have employees, every organization have employees who are champions, and they champion the cause, they champion the energy and the change, but you have resistors as well. How do you formulate the path forward to not only embrace the champions, but also address the resistors and those people that are on the fence? Noelle, let's start with you.
It's got to, your job as a DEI leader, it's so unfortunate that that's such a big job. And it's so often thought to be, well, it's the you know, we have a DEI leader. It's not the it's got to start from the top. And when you talk about the resistors, it has to start from the very top of an organization. I was recently, so I've been working with a consultant that works with beer companies. And it's really fascinating because a lot of beer is designed by a representative group that has a certain palate. And you know, there's so much of like missed opportunity and revenue that beer companies are missing out on because the beer isn't developed by their customer base, right? And so it was this interesting thing, and I reached out to a beer company CEO, and he said, we don't have a problem with this, we don't need this. And I just say that it was like, you need this more than anybody needs this. I resisted, but I really wanted to do that. So I think it's got to start from the top, because also a lot of DEI work previously was compliance focused, right? Which means that it's inherently reactive and it's not proactive in thinking about like what's next and how do we make improvements. And so I think that there's still a lot of education within some HR leaders of that collecting this data, and it's already data that you already have, it's just in your systems and it's unusable, like collecting this will be beneficial for you as an organization. And so when it starts from the top and your CEO says, I care about this is a CEO initiative, it gives permission to that HR team, it gives permission to that DEI team that I care about this and I want to see this. And then that equips you to better understand where to focus your efforts because you see the data and where you have opportunity areas. So I think that time and time again, the permission from the top is so important. And then I would also say on the resistor side, what I've seen a lot of is, again, because this was like compliance driven in the past, and so that inherently meant that there was like fear around this data and around this work, that because there's been kind of this fear around the work, it means that, oh, we've got it figured out and we'll go and try and solve this and build this ourselves. We'll go and try and do the Excel spreadsheet, and if it's nasty, don't do it. But so I would say that like that piece of the resistance of, oh, we can't try and get better because we're scared to even look at what's happening. I see a lot of resistance there, which is really unfortunate. And I think that mentality, again, culturally of like coming from the top of, hey, we want to improve and we know that we need this data in order to improve.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just want to add one thing you mentioned as far as compliance driven. So we have mandatory training at the city. And I see one of my employees in the audience right now. And one of the biggest pet peeves I have is we aren't finishing our compliance training on time. And I started asking people, why aren't we finishing our, they don't want to do it because it's compliance driven and it's not really driven based on the mission. It's not really driven based on top-down approach. So great points.
Yeah, you're spot on, not to deviate to your original question, but we advise our clients to hold off on training until we do a strategic plan so we can identify their problem spots, right? And then we focus the training programs on those problem spots. But to your earlier question about how do you manage the resistors, if I had that answer, I would probably run for president. It's the hardest thing to achieve because you're dealing with history, right? And changing someone's heart in a group setting is very difficult and almost impossible. What I've seen work is one-on-one discussion. And then we have we're more alike than different. So the connection between I have a daughter, I love her to death. And when I speak with another man who also has a daughter around the same age, we want the same thing for our daughters, okay? So that's where we connect. So I will talk to him about the World Economic Forum has a study, I think it's about a year old. Women in gender discrimination, women are 0.76 or 76% equivalent in terms of equity to men, okay? So that's really saying that if you have a young daughter, they're gonna get paid 76 cents to the dollar that a man makes, okay? Do you want that for your daughter? I don't, and the other part of this work is we have to change the theme that it's just black, okay? Every time that we're working with engagements, when we're talking to people who aren't really educated in DE&I, it's black versus white. No, it's a lot broader than that. People with disabilities, okay, LGBTQ, religious, You know, we are a country that has so many different, you know, religion. Even Christianity has several different types of Christianity. So you want to, I've found that it's easier to connect one-on-one to change, or at least have a common understanding of someone else's point of view. And I was always raised to seek to understand first. And in that, you know, this is why we do this work.
Yeah, I think those were really good points, and I'll probably just give maybe a specific example of that and talk maybe about resistance at the end. But 100% agree, it's got to be top down. And so the National Minority Supplier Development Council, I think I just mentioned, we had our conference in New Orleans, and if I saw you there, I had a lot of fun, so I apologize in advance. Too much New Orleans, wow, post-pandemic. Yeah, take some Tylenol, I promise. No, but it was a lot of fun, you know, and I had just spoken about blockchain or some emerging technologies, right? And I'm out in the hallway, and this guy crosses past me, and I'm like, I've seen this guy before. We're at a diversity conference, it's a white older man, and I was like, that's the chief supply chain officer of a Fortune 500 company. And he's got people that have people that have people that go to this thing. And I said, Peter, he's like, Sam, how are you? And I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, I love these things. I wouldn't miss it for the world, right? The third or fourth person in charge makes all the buying decisions on top of the CPO was there, right? And that, it just kind of shook me a bit. And I'd met him before out at a function, and he was a really great guy. And you know what? Not only were there CPOs there, right? Everywhere there were CPOs you went, you know? Of these large and mid-market companies, right? They employ hundreds of thousands of people. Because it has that, because it's at the top that's really saying, hey, this is important, it aligns the whole organization. And what I've seen is, with the resistors, right? I think DE&I started as, we need to do better, right? This whole idea of, we need to help those that are being held back because of discrimination, because of not being equal in our opportunities, right, or our outcomes. But what we found in the last, 10, 15 years is that, and you started with these statistics, it actually helps companies hire better people, increase revenues, and innovate, right? So those people are like, oh, we shouldn't do that. Actually, they're doing better now. So there's a really good reason for it. And I think when you have resistors, one, showing them those hard statistics on that, again with data, super important. And the second thing that I think a lot of large corporations do well that we've just now implemented at our organization, which isn't nearly as big, are business resource groups, right? And if you're in a medium-sized company, a small, like an SMB company, you may not think, oh, we're too small for that. We have under 100 employees. A BRG, or any type of group where you put people together over a common cause, can really change the hearts and minds of people. And when you invite those same people that may resist to some of these events, let me tell you, you really just, you may resist what you don't know. But once you know it, once you've met those people, as you both have said, it can really change things. So I think it's a combination of those things, and they all really need to be working in tandem.
Great points. I just looked at my time, and I was saying, we're coming up on 10 minutes for questions. We have like 4 minutes. So sorry about that. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hey everybody, my name is Jonathan Newland. I work with Improving Enterprises out of Atlanta. We're an IT consulting services company. No competition, Sam, we're all good here. I had a question for Keith. Sorry, I'm trying to go through all of my wonderful notes here. Okay, so you were mentioning the qualitative data, right, and collecting that. So making sure that it's accurate and accessible. So the challenge we have, we started our DEI Council back in 2020, and we've had conversations, we've had education, that's great. But in terms of actually collecting that data, we can send out a survey and say, hey, here are these boxes. Are you comfortable with checking these off? Now, if there are folks that aren't comfortable with checking those off, especially maybe when it comes to LGBTQ plus communities and other groups that they may be a part of that they don't want to actively claim, how do you ensure or encourage that the people to actually provide that correct data so we can start making those changes that you're talking about?
Well, you can't ensure, but you can try to create an environment where they feel comfortable enough to share that. And honestly, it takes a certain personality to do this type of work. So you can't do this for money and that be your only goal. You have to actually care about people, and trust me, it will come across if you care, right? So if you create an environment where people feel comfortable to confide in you, then you should be able to get and trust, you should be able to get an authentic answer. And so I would say more so along that. Did I answer your question? Yeah, I'll let you, real quick. I think, you know, that's where the training can come in. You know, you do more education, and I think the awareness starts to happen over time. It's the steady drip of water will burn a hole in a rock. You have to be persistent and consistent with the training and the content, because there's a lot of folks that don't know, and they're completely innocent. They may not know what they're doing, and building some form of education where they can become self-aware and come into that light, that's what you need to do.
I agree with everything that you're saying, Keith. I think that the communications around intentions for why you're doing what you're doing, the communications around a self-ID process is so important so that people do feel comfortable. They don't feel like they're tattling on their manager and like that they're gonna get in trouble. They truly understand this is our goal as an organization. The other thing I'll say is with Illoominus, for example, I mean, we built from the very, very beginning. We don't ever look at Noelle's file within our tool. We look at trends across representative groups. So when we pull together data from an employee engagement survey, when we pull that together with HR data, yeah, it means you don't get as much functionality, but it means that truthfully, like, our customers are not able to see individual responses. And even if there are less than 5 employees within a department, we shut off your ability to break into that, to look at that department if it's less than a certain number of data points, so that you can't begin to dissect across different groups of what those responses are. So I think that that's incredibly important, because you were talking about earlier, like, organizations are gonna start asking about things like religion, LGBTQ status. Listen, like, every global company is trying to think about global DEI reporting. And so as you start to think about some countries where LGBTQ is not legal, we have to be, yes, we're talking about data and the importance of data, but we have to be really careful about how we're gathering and using that data. So intentionally, from the very beginning, we don't touch it.
Great points. We are over time. So as we wrap up, what is one word, you only get one word, that would, you want to leave us with, that would encompass DEI and the use of data to drive results? One word. We didn't talk about this beforehand.
Yeah, it's a surprise question. I would say one word: empathy.
Empathy. No explanations. We're over time.
Collaboration.
Now.
All right. With that, let's thank our panelists. Great conversation. And thank you all for staying.